Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room 237, and this is going to be a really random review because not at all part of my extreme marathon, but I had to run to Walgreens earlier, and I just happened to notice on Redbox that the Tom Hardy Capone film was out. I know it's not a horror film. I will be doing a review of that because next to horror, I absolutely love the true crime mafia films, and I'm a big Tom Hardy fan. So I'll be reviewing that. But while I was at Redbox, I saw this was there, and normally I would pass on a film like this, but there was an element that had me interested, and I wanted to check it out, and that was Underwater, which came out this year, and it does star Kristen Stewart, who I'm not a fan of. Um, Not just because of Twilight. I think she's a very wooden actress. I liked her better as a child star. You know, a lot of people don't like Pantochrome. I like Pantochrome, still do. In high school, we had to read and watch Speak, which she's in. I like the book and I like the movie. I like her in it. But that's about it. I'm not a Kristen Stewart fan, even outside of Twilight. It was directed by William Eubank, who directed films like Love, The Signal, and this. I didn't see his other two. Also stars Vincent Cassel, Jessica Henwick, John Gallagher Jr., who will actually be in the next film that I'll be reviewing. He was the lead in The Belko Experiment, which I really enjoyed. Mahmoud Athie, and T.J. Miller, of course, as the comic relief. Of course, real quick, it takes place 7 miles down under the ocean surface in this, I believe it's like a drilling kind of facility. Pressure breach. A group of characters have to escape or find a way to get to the surface, and they find these creatures that are all prodigies of this greater monster that, now, while this is not an adaptation of anything by H.P. Lovecraft whatsoever. But the director has gone on to say that the big monster at the end is, I've always said Cthulhu. I know it's also pronounced Cthulhu, mostly Cthulhu. I know Lovecraft himself pronounced it as Kololu. That kind of gets a little twisty to say sometimes. I'm just gonna say Cthulhu because that's what I've always said. So this is not a Lovecraftian story, like say, or it's not a Lovecraft. It is Lovecraftian. It's not a Lovecraft story. It's not Color Out of Space or Dunwich Horror or anything like that. Or it's not even a combination of films like Dagon or The Haunted Castle or anything like that. I'm a big Lovecraft fan. So even though this is not a Lovecraft story or adaptation, the fact that it is Cthulhu at the end, I was really interested in. Now the movie itself, I can say I enjoyed the film for what it is. It's a deep underwater sort of sci-fi action horror film or thriller. It's a mixture of all those. Now, the story is not original whatsoever. There's little bits of everything in it. Most notably, Alien and Leviathan. Even the opening of the film, the opening credits sort of has that slow reveal of the names and credits, but it's going downward. So even then, it's like Alien. Uh, Even Leviathan from 1989, I believe it is. 88, 89. That's considered an Alien ripoff or inspired film. I do like Leviathan. I haven't seen it in years, but I remember liking it. Uh, my One of my absolute favorite YouTubers, Rambo Ride for Life. That's one of his favorite films. So definitely Alien, Leviathan. A little bit of The Descent. One, because they are super deep, but even at some glance, the look of the creatures kind of. If you take the creatures from The Descent and give them like a Lovecraftian makeover, it's kind of what they look like. Also, Deep Blue Sea, because it deals with this sort of underwater facility that gets breached, and they have to find a way to escape to the surface. And yeah, just sort of and also mixture of like some Cloverfield, which I know T.J. Miller was in Cloverfield, John Gallagher Jr. was in 10 Cloverfield Lane. So it's got a mixture of a bunch of things, and I will say the characters are either very thin or stock. The dialogue or the script is kind of poor, but I liked it as a movie. Like, I wasn't watching it for the back and forth between the characters. There is a lot of CGI just because of the environment they're in, because of the creatures there are, but I think it looks fine. It doesn't. This kind of feels like a film that would have come out the late 90s, early 2000s. I know I sound like shit. I'm trying not to sniff or blow my nose as much. I was fine 5 minutes ago watching TV. Like, watching shit. Fucking pissed me off. My allergies are ugh. Hell, there was even a Lovecraft movie called Dagon that was released in the early 2000s. That was a Stuart Gordon film. I reviewed that. I like that. But it feels like it got like set aside. Now they're making it today just because the dialogue and the characters and a lot of cliches are done feel that dated. I mean, you have Kristen Stewart, who's the lead, and again, Kristen Stewart actually gave a decent performance. She wasn't a complete plank of wood. She's this computer engineer, and this movie does not waste any fucking time. It's a 90-minute, roughly 90. I think it's like a 90-minute movie. 95-minute movie. Within the first 5 minutes, you get the pressure breach, and that kickstarts the whole movie, so it doesn't waste any time. One thing I did like, because while there's the pressure breach and she's running through, she meets up with this other character who, I'm going to say spoilers here, because it did just come out. But, sadly, this was a flop. It had a budget of 50 to 80 million, and it only made 40.9 at the box office. Of course, it came out right around the threshold of Corona, so that could be attributed to it. It got mixed reviews. Some people liked it, some people didn't. Before I get into spoilers, I can say I liked it. If you're into that sort of survival, escape kind of action thriller, like say a Deep Blue Sea or Alien or Leviathan, this is definitely for you. I mean, the production design is well done. The CGI is well done. The environment, it's very atmospheric. You know, it really uses its claustrophobia when it needs to. Even when they're out walking the ocean floor down in the abyss, which is another movie, it's completely pitch black. They only have their flashlights. So even though it's big and open, you still get that claustrophobic feel of only knowing what's directly in front of you. The look of the creatures are great. A lot of times they're either very quick or obscured by darkness, which in a Lovecraft inspired story that works. Even the final look of Cthulhu I enjoy. It's a different look than from what I've seen before. The only problems I would have is during a lot of the action scenes or scare scenes, it does get a little shaky and a little dark, and it is kind of hard to tell what's going on. The script is kind of poor. The characters are really stock. Because you had the lead, you have the black guy who dies first. TJ Miller is the comic relief who really does nothing but tell jokes. The kind of character where you could take him out of the movie and nothing would be different. John Gallagher Jr., who's sort of the chill guy, who's dating this other girl who's the one that panics. And then you have Vincent Cassell, who's sort of the hard-ass captain. So you have all these stock characters, sort of poor dialogue, and I like what Brad Jones said. A lot of the characters get PG-13 to death, which means you don't really get to see a lot of what happens to them. But there is one death. I'm just going to say it here. The black guy dies first. That's why I said it. Even though that's still going on, that's why it feels like a movie trapped from a different time. It's getting released now. Is another. They use their environment because his suit gets breached and he implodes from the pressure. I thought it was a decent effect. No, it's not for everyone. A lot of people don't like a lot of CGI movies. But considering, it's an underwater creature feature, you're probably going to get CGI. Leviathan had practical effects, but it still looks great. Yeah, it gets a little shaky, gets a little dark at times. It's moves at a great pace. It does shift into Gravity. That's another movie that it's like, just because of the suits, they have to be careful when they're out walking around. There's even a part they have to get from like one station to another. There's even a part where Kristen Stewart gets to another point. She can take her suit off, and she's in like her underwear, like a sports bra, and she even curls up in like a similar fetal position like Sandra Bullock did in Gravity. So even though it's highly derivative, we've seen almost the whole movie before, but it uses its claustrophobia, its atmosphere, its effects, the look of the creatures. It is worth checking out. I mean, definitely on Redbox, so I will say that, but with that said, getting into spoilers. She meets up with the first character. Then they find T.J. Miller. Because there's a part where they have to literally crawl through like this debris. They find T.J. Miller, the comic relief. Then they find the captain. They get up to this other level where they find the Jennifer Henwick and John Gallagher Jr. character. And that's when they decide they have to get down to the ocean floor, walk about a mile, get to this other station, this other drilling station that had the escape pods, then they can shoot up to the surface. And then the rest of the film is just all the shit they encounter between that point and the ending. And yeah, like when they do go out on well, first I'll say I can wrap my head around and the suspension of disbelief around the Lovecraftian creatures. I can buy that. What I had a hard time with is just the amount of pressure that's down in the trenches of the ocean. I didn't buy that those suits could withhold it. Even though the suits look great, there's a lot of detail, they look very modern, but the helmets looked like very thin glass. Okay, sure. I mean, that's how the first guy dies. There's all these cracks, and then once it finally goes, you literally see him implode. Again, decent effect. And they keep encountering all of these sort of miniature Cthulhu creatures with with tentacles. There is a part where John Gallagher gets dragged off. Well, first, T.J. Miller, the only thing he does that has any sort of levity, not cracking jokes, was they get to this one place, he finds a moon pie. And normally we would expect him to kind of, sort of hear rapping sounds and chewing. They look back and he's like, what? Doesn't do that. He gives it to John Gallagher and he's like, hey, why don't you give this to your girlfriend? She needs it more than we do. That's really and then he kind of stays back a little bit. You kind of get the idea, maybe he's not really baiting himself, but buying them time. It was kind of hard to tell because they are kind of tethered together because they have to go underwater through this debris. He makes it through, but then he's pulled. And it was kind of hard to see because this is when it gets kind of shaky, kind of fast, kind of dark, where I guess he got pulled through his suit, which it looked like, but we didn't really know that's what happened until someone said it. Another one of his things is he has this little stuffed bunny that even while he's getting pulled away, he takes it out of his suit to give to someone. Never really says what it's for, whether it's his favorite thing or belongs to his daughter or whatever. Or when they're out walking the ocean floor, and John Gallagher's character gets dragged off. There's like this crevice. Captain walks through or crawls through, drops his gun, and of course he's tethered to Kristen Stewart. And then there's all this pulling around, and it's really hard to tell what's going on. We're able to figure it out. And another point like gravity, because they're holding on, this creature's pulling the captain away, and their suits are getting damaged, and it's counting down 10%, 9% of what's left. He actually has to hit a button to let himself go. So it's kind of like when George Clooney let himself go from Sandra Bullock in Gravity. But Kristen Stewart gets to this one station that they said was abandoned. It is. She gets a different suit. Catches up with John Gallagher and the other female character. They do make it to the station they were trying to get to. And this is where it all sort of comes together because they see the entryway and there's all these tentacles hanging. And they see it's all the creatures. But these ones are bigger. There's like a hand that brushes up against Kristen Stewart's helmet. It's like this long hand with all this loose web skin. The other woman, her oxygen alarm goes off, which awakens all of them. One even starts to eat Kristen Stewart whole. And again, lots of CGI, but it works. She blasts her way through that. And this is when we finally get to see Cthulhu. She has like this underwater flare gun. You can kind of see, even though it's hard to see that underwater stuff because of how dark it is, it uses it to its advantage. It creates dread. It creates claustrophobia, even with how open it is. They did use the darkness to their advantage, at least I thought. And with that, you can kind of make out a shape of a giant bee or entity. And when that flare goes over it, you see the silhouette of this massive, colossal creature. Really like the look of Cthulhu. Yes, you can see his mouth and the tentacles are around it. But where it's not a Lovecraft story, I like how they kind of did their own design. I think it worked. But I like it because the whole top where these tentacle creatures were hanging just seems to lift up and go away. That's how she knows there's something bigger. And they're all sort of like barnacles under his arm. But she gets in the pod, or they get in the station. There's only 2 pods. So she forces the other 2 in their own pod. They shoot out. Another thing I forgot to say, this movie is quite suspenseful. It does get intense. It does have a lot of suspense to it. Like there's a screen that shows the pods, and you just, out the window you see all these creatures, all these little Cthulhu progenies, I guess, flying off of them, and on the screen it shows the swarm going up to the pods. And that's when she decides to just say fuck it. Cranks up the pressure down at the core of the whole facility. Makes sure the pods are out of the blast radius and just blows it up. And then we see at the end that they made it, but the company that they worked for is covering it up. A lot of stuff was seized and destroyed. I think it says something about trying again with the newer facility. As derivative as this film is, and as bad as the script, like, I get, if someone doesn't like this movie, I understand why. Totally get it. It does feel like a crappy early 2000s sort of disaster film, but with creatures. Again, like Deep Blue Sea. And even though I'm not a fan of big CGI films, I like the look of the creatures. I like the look of the environment. Definitely sets the atmosphere. I thought it was very atmospheric. The score of the film I liked. It had this sort of, like, when you see the destruction or the creatures, it sort of had this like Inception kind of like that I thought how worked. I don't know, at worst, I found it entertaining. I mean, yes, the characters are very stock. The dialogue is very, I don't really say a minimalist, because it's not, but, I mean, a minimal as in, like, effort. Like, they're just saying what they have to. There's no real characterization or personality. Except for T.J. Miller, who's just the comic relief. That's the only purpose he serves. Really doesn't waste any time jumping into the story. Great pace. Really like it. I'm pretty much just repeating myself, but... And yes, it is like any Alien, Leviathan, Abyss type film. A little bit of The Descent, a little bit of Gravity. You know, it's a bunch of different things, so it's definitely not original. Even as a Lovecraft fan, just a movie that has Cthulhu, it is entertaining. I can award it that. But anyway, that's what I have for Underwater. I was pleasantly surprised by this film and Kristen Stewart's performance, so I could say I enjoyed it, but I hope there's not too many jaded people out there and hate it because Kristen Stewart, because CGI, because it's not a Lovecraft adaptation, because it's 2020, I don't know. But anyway, thank you for watching.